Hello, and welcome everyone to our Q&A session for our upcoming video course, Training for Modern Mystics and Prophets, the 7-week course to embody the wisdom of Meister Eckhart, Hildegard of Bingen, Thomas Merton, and Mary Oliver. I'm Ann Patricio, and it's my pleasure to be here to host this Q&A conversation for the Shift Network, where we'll explore the teachings of Matthew Fox and address questions about his 7-week video course, Training for Modern Mystics and Prophets, which begins Wednesday, September the 4th. Now, if for any reason you're unable to join us live for that, you can still participate in this course, and I'll be explaining more about that later. But first, I want to introduce my guest. Matthew Fox has been really dedicated to renewing the ancient tradition of creation spirituality. The tradition is feminist and welcoming of arts and artists, wisdom-centered, prophetic, and committed to eco-justice, social justice, and gender justice. Matthew's effort to reawaken the West to its own mystical tradition has included reviving awareness of Hildegard of Bingen, Meister Eckhart, and the mystics of Thomas Aquinas, as well as interacting with contemporary scientists who are also mystics. Now, in just a few moments, we're going to open up for your questions. But first, I want to welcome Matthew, who will begin our call by leading us in an opening practice. Welcome, Matthew. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Ann. Good to be with you and everyone else who's online here, whom I cannot see, but I can imagine. I'm excited about this course, Training for Modern Mystics and Prophets, because I think it's timely. I think we're going through so much as a species today. The Earth is going through so much struggle and peril, and of course the Amazon fires raging right now are just one example of that. That we all have to go deeper. We have to dig deeper into our deeper selves. And that's what the mystic is, to dig deep and find the love that's there, the compassion that's there, the energy that's there, the fire that's there. And the prophet is the fighter. The prophet, Rabbi Heschel says, is the one who interferes. The prophet stands up and says no. The mystic says yes. So that marvelous dialectic, that dance between yes and no, between love and defending what we cherish, that is what this course is about. How to develop more deeply our capacity for effective healing, justice-making, compassion, and to ground it in a profound spiritual basis. So it's not just our reptilian brains doing action and reaction responses. Then we go deeper into what it really means to be human. And I think the words mystic and prophet come very close to naming our deepest capacities that all the world's spiritual traditions are trying to teach us and have been trying to teach us. So you asked if you might begin with a little practice, and I'm happy to do that. So I invite people to sit and put their feet on the floor, so in the back, straight, not rigid, but straight. And I will do this little practice. It has echoes of teachings from Thich Nhat Hanh. It's very simple, and it's about breathing in and breathing out. Hildegard of Bingen says, prayer is nothing but inhaling and exhaling, the one breath of the universe. And of course, the word breath is also the word for spirit, not only in biblical languages, but in many languages around the world, including African languages. So let's breathe in, awe. As we breathe in our deep breath, let's breathe in awe and breathe out awe. So let's begin that way. You may want to shut your eyes. Breathe in awe in a deep way, deep breath, and then exhale awe. Let's do that again. In awe, out awe. And again, in awe, out awe. In awe, out boredom. Breathe in awe, breathe out boredom. Breathe in awe, breathe out boredom. Breathe in joy and breathe out joy. Breathe in joy. Breathe out joy. Breathe in joy. Breathe out joy. Breathe in joy. Breathe out sorrow. Breathe in joy. Breathe out sorrow. Breathe in joy. Breathe out sadness. Breathe in joy. Breathe out sadness. Amen. So that's a simple way to start our time together. Leading with the via positiva, with our experiences of awe, wonder, and joy, because this is where we derive our deepest strength, and it takes us deep.
Thank you so much, Matthew. So we'll spend the rest of our time together exploring your questions for Matthew as we prepare for his upcoming video course, Training for Modern Mystics and Prophets, which begins Wednesday, September the 4th. So I urge you to go over and visit our website, modernmysticsandprophets.com, to learn more about this 7-week video course, and you'll find a link to register there as well. So we're going to get started with questions. If you have a question for Matthew, please just type it in, and I'll be happy to read it out. And I want to thank everyone who took the time to send questions in ahead of time. Thank you for all of those great questions. Now, we're going to start with a question from Eileen. She says, what can an individual do to see justice in the world and allow peaceful negotiations?
Well, we have to become informed. We have to know about where the injustice is happening. I think justice begins with a kick in the stomach, in the third chakra, about injustice. And of course, we have to be attuned to that then. And we have to have an inner life that allows us to take in bad news without wilting or without just responding, as I said earlier, with a reptilian brain response. So we have to do that inner work at the same time that we're imagining alternatives, a different way to live more justly in the world. Consider, for example, the example of the rainforest burning at this time in the Amazon. That we have to understand the problem that we have a situation where industrial farming and mining are tearing down this ancient forest that is so necessary for the entire planet to breathe. From that forest alone, 20% of our oxygen is generated around the world. So we have to know the extent of the problem and the causes. And of course, the causes are quite familiar. Humanity is famous for its greed. It's famous for its violence and its disregard. How greed can make you so small-minded that we utterly disregard the future, the children and the great-grandchildren to come. So all of us are capable of this kind of evil. And we have to realize that it's not just some other person. We have to realize that as human beings, we all participate. Another problem then we have is, why are these cattle farmers denuding the forest to grow cattle? Well, people are eating beef, and beef is extremely demanding of the environment. The amount of water it takes, the amount of land it takes, the amount of food it takes, and the amount of methane that is distributed by cattle, all generating very negative effects on the CO2 level and so forth. So one way to respond to this particular crisis and make justice happen is by living without beef. And I think a lot of young people today are feeling themselves called to a vegan diet, or at least a vegetarian diet, for these very reasons. So there's a lot that goes into the work of justice and combating injustice today. But those are a few thoughts. And what we'll be doing in the class is we'll be developing, drawing on these wonderful guides, Hildegard, Aquinas, from pre-modern times, and Merton and Mary Oliver from our times. We'll be drawing on their wisdom as to how you develop that inner life, so that we do learn how to let go. We do learn how to let be. We do learn how to live different lifestyles without it being a burden. In fact, with it being a joy to serve future generations and to serve this planet and its many beautiful creatures, humans among them, who are imperiled today.
Thanks, Matthew. We're going to a question sent into the webcast by John. He says, I'm a fan of the 4 paths of creation spirituality. I see and experience them as a cycle in the shape of a helix, rotating and rising simultaneously. I see and experience the cycle underlying small and large transformations in my life. And I see it as a model of macrocosmic unfolding as well. Am I seeing it as you do? Is this your understanding and experience of the 4 paths?
Mm-hmm. It is. In fact, I just wrote I do a daily meditations with Matthew Fox event every day. It's a free thing. You just go online, daily meditations with Matthew Fox. And just yesterday, I think, or maybe it was today, I was talking about how the 4 paths interact, weave with one another, interweave. And I think that's really important. For example, being hit by this news from the Amazon, what was it, about a week or so ago, I myself went into a profound via negativa. I mean, things are bad enough on this planet without the Amazon literally burning like never before. And I realize how important it is that we stay attuned in the darkest of times. We need to stay attuned to the via positiva, to that path of joy and of wonder and of gratitude. So while I was developing in my daily meditations the 4 paths, and I was beginning with the first, the via positiva, I realized we don't just want to leave that behind as we get into a via negativa struggle or mood. You need to bring the via positiva along. And I was quoting Hildegard at the beginning, and also Rabbi Heschel, about how important remembering is. We have to remember the joy, even when you don't feel it or see it. We have to remember the awe and the reverence and the gratitude, all of which emerge from the via positiva. So we have to carry that with us into the darkness, into the struggle. It's not just about moving from the via positiva to the via negativa. And the same is true, of course, within the via negativa. It's not just about suffering and grief and loss, though that is real. It's also about silence and stillness, that contemplative mood that mindfulness comes with. The mind first. Mindfulness is preceded by mind emptiness. So there's an emptiness in the via negativa that you have to bring into the suffering and into the pain. And yet you don't want to get attached to that either. So I really love this question by John, because it gets to really how subtle this journey is. And it is a constant dance. It's a giving and a taking, a receiving and a doing, a being and a doing. And that's what marks the mystical journey, that is both via positiva and via negativa. Matilda Magdeburg, the 13th century Beguine, Beguines were the women's movement of the Middle Ages. She says we're given two wines to drink in life, the white wine of joy and the red wine of suffering. And until you drink deeply of both, you have not lived. So I think that summarizes beautifully what the power of naming the via positiva and the via negativa is about. That the real energy for living requires our ability to take delight in existence on the one hand, but also to undergo its demands. And the practice of letting go and letting be is learned both in meditation, but also from suffering itself. That here, in a direct way, there's very little we can do about the Amazon burning. But as I spoke of earlier, there are many things we can do to assist at this time the bigger picture of what's making the Amazon burn.
Thank you for that, Matthew. We're going over to a question from Peggy. I have felt a strong desire to develop my ability to intuit and to see, but I also feel that I should have a teacher. And so far, none has presented him or herself to me. If I have a spirit guide, how can I hear?
Now, by spirit guide, I presume she's not talking about an unfleshed teacher on this planet. She's talking about more of an angelic teacher, something like that. Is that how you interpret that question?
You know, I think we could look at it in both ways, just how the teacher might come forward. Yeah.
I'm always happy to talk about angels. I've written a book on angels with the scientist Rupert Sheldrake called The Physics of Angels. And I have no doubt that we can call on the angels for assistance and that they're eager to help us. And there are a lot of them around looking to help us today. But we do have to ask them for some help. And it's nothing fancy. They're very bright and they're intuitive and they know what's going on. But they do want to be asked for the help. So one way to do that is to ask before you go to bed at night, because they love to come in while we're dreaming. They love to enter our dreams. And that's a very heightened form of intuition. So you can invoke them, call them in, and just ask them to show up. And have a paper and pencil next to your bed, because it's one thing for them to show up. It's another thing for you to be awake the whole night long. You need your sleep. Angels often don't understand our bodily needs that well. So that's one topic, the topic of angels and spirits. And of course, that includes some ancestors too, who want to visit us. And we can call on them. But if you're talking about finding a teacher, you do have to weigh that. You have to discern. I think that I've deliberately chosen these 4 guides for our class because I know they're for real. I know Hildegard and her journey and her life and her writings and her music and her amazing story and her whole effort to bring the divine feminine back. So she's a tremendous guide today. Now, it's interesting that she was just made a saint and a doctor of the church, but she died 800 years ago, so it's kind of interesting as to how long it took them. It took knowledge or wisdom. And I think a lot that has to do with her taking on patriarchal powers and what can I say? Not always treading lightly on their toes. So it's pretty unusual for a saint to have to wait 800 years to be acknowledged. So even that, I think, is interesting, that Hildegard is a Trojan horse inside patriarchal institutions. And I won't name the church by name as being one of those. But anyway, she's broken through. But Eckhart, too, is simply amazing, an amazing guide today. And one of the biggest dimensions to Eckhart is his uncanny recognition by spiritual teachers around the world. So my most recent book on Eckhart, I put him in the room with a different spiritual tradition, each chapter. The first chapter, Rabbi Heschel, the Jewish tradition. The second chapter with science, Teilhard de Chardin and Thomas Berry, and the new ecology and the new cosmology. Thich Nhat Hanh and Buddhism. Eckhart is profoundly Buddhist, but he never met a Buddhist in his life or read a Buddhist book. But he plummeted into his own experience and his own soul out of his own Christian tradition. And he found parallel truths to what the Buddha, a lot of Buddhism is far more universal than Buddhism itself. It's about human nature. And I put him in the room with Coomaraswamy, the Hindu, and Coomaraswamy says, reading Eckhart is like reading the Upanishads, which is an amazing compliment. You can't get a higher compliment from a Hindu than that. He says there are whole sentences in Eckhart that feel like they were translated from the Sanskrit. I put in the room with Carl Jung, because Carl Jung says he learned the key to the unconscious from Meister Eckhart. I put him in the room with Black Elk, because this is profound shamanism and indigenous wisdom to Eckhart's experiences and view of the world and of our spiritual journey. I put him in the room with Adrienne Rich, because there's a feminism to Eckhart that is so profound and so forth. So Eckhart is just an amazing guide too. And so these are spirit teachers, and you can't do much better. And then there's Merton, and there's Mary Oliver. And I don't want to go too long with just one question, but I think you'll agree with me that Merton was a major figure. And the latest scholarship on Merton is that he died a martyr. He was murdered because he stood up against the Vietnam War, and he was the first religious figure to do so. His good friend Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr., he followed on Merton's protest of the war. And of course, Mary Oliver hardly needs that much introduction or celebration. She has spoken to so many hearts in our time. So, to be blunt, I don't think you can do much better than these four spirit guides. And I would say, give it a shot and see if they don't take you to deep places and empower you, because that's the key. We need empowerment today. We need mystics in the world, lovers. We need prophets in the world. That's what this course is intended to deliver.
Thank you so much, Matthew. We have a question coming through. Do you really think that everyone has the potential to be a prophet? I feel intimidated and filled with doubt when seeing the amazing works of these masters.
Well, Rabbi Heschel, who wrote the most scholarly work on the prophets, 1962, I think it was, a big book called The Prophets. And he didn't just write a book, he also walked his talk, literally. He was marched in Selma with Dr. King and so forth. He put his body on the line. And he did so against the advice of a lot of his Jewish community, who felt there was enough anti-Semitism in America without kind of invading the South and so forth. But Heschel literally walked his talk, and he talked his walk. But Heschel says that there lies in the recesses of every human existence a prophet. Now that sentence is coming from the greatest scholar on the prophets ever, and a man who walked his talk. Very, very holy man, and very, very smart, wise man, Rabbi Heschel. So then, hey, that means we're all potentially prophets. But the key word in that sentence lies in the recesses of every human existence. How do we get to the recesses? That's exactly what the four paths are about. The previous caller, John, I think it was, spoke to those four paths, and that's what we will be introducing our very first class, because that language is so important. We have to have concepts to go deep, to touch the recesses. St. Thomas Aquinas, a brilliant genius and a mystic in his own right, and he said that to teach spirituality, experience is not enough. Now, experience is totally important, because that's what spirituality is. It's about experience. But to teach it, we need concepts. The human mind needs images to learn, and it needs concepts. And these four paths are really primal. And for the very reason that Heschel is introducing here, that to get to our recesses, how do you get there? Well, I think the recesses of joy and wonder, the recesses of silence and of suffering, via negativa, the recesses of creativity. You don't give birth off the top of your head. You give birth out of the depths of yourself. So birthing is a recess. And then finally, the via transformativa, the work of passion for justice, compassion, that is a recess too. I think we're all born with a yearning for justice and even an awareness of injustice. But we have, many things in life take us on detours, and growing up is not easy, and especially today with all the distractions that are thrown at us 24/7. We have to get deeper than the distractions, get down to the recesses. There's a wonderful line from Howard Thurman, the great African-American mystic who was the spiritual genius behind the civil rights movement. He and his wife, who went to India in 1935, met with many spiritual leaders, including Gandhi, and they brought back Gandhi's nonviolent movement to the Black community in America. But Howard Thurman has this line that repeats often. It's very important to him. He says that we become stripped to the literal substance of ourselves before God. But that's what spirituality is really about, being stripped to the literal substance of ourselves before God. I think the passion for justice brings that out. I think our passion for birthing and creativity and imagination, moral imagination, brings that out. I think that the experience of suffering brings that out, and of silence, and also our experience of joy and wonder. So this person who asked this question, absolutely, positively, you have in you a prophet, and we all do. But we have to find the recesses, and that's what's so powerful about bringing the mystic with the prophet. It's been said that the prophet is the mystic in action. Prophet is a mystic in action. So we have to develop that inner work of the mystic to get to the core of ourselves, to get to the source, to get to our depths. And then that is what you bring into the prophetic work. So there's two things going on here: the inner work, the via positiva and via negativa, and the outer work, which begins with the bridge is the creativity that comes out of the first two paths, and then the work of healing, justice making, compassion in the world. That's the rhythm, and we're all capable of it. And remember, it's not a singular individualistic journey. We do it together. We find allies. We find communities. We can't find them, we make them. This is a group task, the task of tikkun, of healing the world.
Wonderful. So if you're just joining us, I wanted to welcome you and let you know that we're here with Matthew Fox, learning about his course, Training for Modern Mystics and Prophets, which will begin on Wednesday, September the 4th. So please log on to modernmysticsandprophets.com for all the details and to register to join us. I have a question from Carla. If we are to consider Jesus as our model, what are we meant to gain from, one, the reported resurrection of his physical body, and two, his appearances on earth of perhaps his non-physical body? How are we to imitate Jesus in these respects? Do not these events show us that his spirituality is not within our reach?
Well, let's talk about these resurrection appearances, because I think people, I know, I don't think this, I know, that people have experiences like this all the time. I have a good friend. He's Chinese. He was not raised in any religion as such. In fact, he likes to say he thinks that religion is a bit like baseball teams or baseball cards that are enough to competition. But he's a person of great integrity, and he's a blue-collar worker. He builds things with his hands, very good at it. After his mother died, 3 months or so after his mother died, she appeared to him at the end of his bed, and they had a conversation. And she said things like, "Remember the values that I've taught you," and so forth. And every time he tells me this story, his eyes well up with tears. And it's a resurrection experience that he had. And I often, especially lately, the last few years, when I'm lecturing, I will tell people this story, and then I'll tell people, "Now shut your eyes." And I'm talking maybe as many as 1,000 people or 300 or 400 people at a time. Say, "Shut your eyes." I tell them the story, say, "Shut your eyes." Now, how many, I ask, of you have had experiences like this? And raise your hand with the eyes shut, because this is not a competition. Often, it's 85 to 90% of the people raise their hands. They've had experiences like this. Then I'll say, "Okay, now keep your eyes shut. How many of you have spoken to people whom you trust, who are not kooky, who are together, who've had experiences like this?" And again, it's usually 80 to 90% of the people raise their hands to that question. So I think that people miss the whole point about Jesus' resurrection. And I'm sorry to say this, because I respect a lot of the theological, biblical scholarship of our time, but I do think that there's far too much reliance on the left brain in some biblical scholars, that they're so busy learning the languages, living in this place of trees, but not the forest, that they don't stop to ask about people's experiences. That's what spirituality is about. It's about experience, not dogmas. Why don't we just stop and ask, "Have you had this experience?" Whoa, 90% have had the experience. Now, why don't they talk about them? Well, because people in the churches don't know how to talk about spiritual experiences. The ministers are trained by books so often. And just like these scholars, they have their noses in books for so many years and so many hours every day. I love books. I've written 36. I hope people read my books. I read their books. You can see behind me, I got lots of books. But the fact is that religion is about books. It's about experiences. And so I don't think that the resurrection experiences are at all unbelievable. And it's so interesting, really, that each one has this different experience. Sometimes the risen Jesus wants to eat fish. Sometimes it says, "Don't." It's a what can I say? A universal expression of the diversity of humanity. So I think Christians can make, on the one hand, too much of the resurrection, on the other hand, far too little. It's just a reminder that, and this is something all people know, you don't have to be a Christian, that this world we live in, these few years that we live on this earth, is not the whole picture. I mean, I can tell you stories about indigenous people who have visitations from dead people on a regular basis. And so the world we live in is not the three-dimensional world, or really what's a two-dimensional world now with the television screen and the computer screen in front of us is now two-dimensional, really. There are many dimensions to this world and to this experience that we call living. And the presence of the ancestors, that's what resurrection is about the return of the ancestors. And all human peoples, therefore, have had their stories. Of course, the thesis, the theme of reincarnation is another way of talking about this. But yeah, so I think that the question is really the bigger question about how many worlds are we living in at once. And that the tragedy is some people get reduced to a two-dimensional world, the television set and the television screen, and of course one's tiny iPad screen. The world is so much more vast than that. And of course, nature itself. You go out into the woods, go to the ocean, go to the mountains, and listen to how many beings are singing to us and wanting to communicate with us. And they're busy displaying their wonderful beauty. Thomas Aquinas says, all beings, all beauty yearns to be conspicuous. All beauty yearns to be conspicuous. So beauty is constantly showing itself, revealing itself to us. And that beauty includes the beauty of our ancestors and the beauty of beautiful ancestors like Jesus. I mean, I've met people who are not Christian to whom Jesus has appeared, several of them. He carved me. I have right here a carving. I'll get you this. This is from a Native American who's not Christian, but he was walking in the woods one day, and lo and behold, Christ appeared to him, and they had a conversation. And then he went and he read my book on the cosmic Christ because he didn't know what had happened to him. And then he created this this amazing totem pole, I guess you'd call it, 4 sides, and it's very much integrates the 4 directions and 4 elements and all with the Christ, the risen Christ that he had experienced. And so, you know, the great lovers like Jesus have not disappeared. They're looking to communicate with us. And as I say, you don't have to be a Christian to receive that communication.
Thanks, Matthew. So we have a couple of questions related to creativity. One person says, I've felt stuck or stifled regarding my creativity for a long time. And how will this course help me reignite my creative spark and interest and expression? And also, Helen is asking, how do I use my talents wisely? So I wonder if you can speak about how creativity will be brought into this course.
Well, of course, these people we're choosing as our guides, each one of them is immensely in touch with their creativity. Each one is a profound artist. Hildegard of Bingen was a genius at music. She also painted. She also raised herbs and healed people. She was an artist in so many ways. She wrote poetry, of course, and 10 books, etc. So she's a champion of creativity. She says, there's wisdom in all creative works. There's wisdom in all creative works. So she's calling us back to our creativity. So the Via Creativa is at the very center of the 4 paths. Obviously, with 4 things, you don't, it's not like 5 where you'd say it was right in the middle, but in fact, it is in the middle because the Via Creativa receives the inner work from the Via Positiva and Via Negativa, and then it moves into the Via Transformativa. So the creativity is the linchpin of the entire 4 paths. And this very much echoes today's physics. If there's anything that distinguishes Einstein and post-Einsteinian scientists from Newton, it is creativity. That Newton felt the universe was done, and it was only our galaxy, by the way, and we had to fit in. That was a basic teaching for hundreds of years. Einstein says, no, it began smaller than a zygote, and it's been growing ever since, expanding ever since. And now we're being told it's 2 trillion galaxies big. But the point is then that creativity is built in, is baked in to the very essence of the universe, and we're part of that universe. In many ways, evolution is another word for creativity. Creativity is everywhere. And if someone is having blocks to their creativity, I think the via positiva and the via negativa really assist us to melt those blocks. And grieving, part of the via negativa is so important for getting the creativity going again. I could tell you a story about this. Years ago, when I was teaching my master's program at Holy Names College, about 6 weeks into the program, a woman came to me. She was about 30, big, strong woman. She said, I'm so upset. I'm not creative. I'm all blocked up. And I thought this would be the most creative time of my life, but I'm really concerned. And I said, well, tell me about your story a little. Well, it turned out that she was raised fundamentalist, and that she left the fundamentalist church at about the age of 14 and went charging into the world. She became a therapist and a feminist and all the rest. She was now about 30. And I said, did you ever say thank you for what the fundamentalist church taught you? She said, what? I said, sit down and write me a paper about what was good about your fundamentalist upbringing. She said, you're kidding. I said, no, I'm not. So she went away and she came back and she listed things. She said the music was real good, the commitment, and the teaching that you do experience God, and the experience of community. There were 5 or 6 points. And we talked about that, and she left. Well, then her whole life changed. Her creativity really started to flow. And what can I say? She sparkled through our program. And on graduating from our program with her master's degree, she went off and she did these amazing things. Like she got a column in the San Francisco Chronicle every week about work and spirituality. It's pretty creative. And then she went to law offices and taught lawyers how to create altars in their law offices. I think that's pretty creative. And so anyway, that was very interesting to me. She had a deal. See, at 14 or so, she just said goodbye. She slammed the door on her past. But at 30, she had to acknowledge her past and acknowledge what was good there. She's not being asked to return to fundamentalism, but to say thank you as you leave the door, not just leave out of anger. So for me, there is a deep, deep lesson in that creativity can be bottled up if we're operating on a worldview that is overly reptilian in its attitude, overly angry, and so forth. So again, I just mentioned how creative Hildegard was, but these other 3 guides, Eckhart, for example, just amazing. I already told the stories about how he's the Hindu to Hinduism, and Buddhist to Buddhism, etc., etc. And of course, he writes incessantly about our powers of birthing and about how when we give birth, we bring the Christ into the world, nothing less, and into ourselves. And you could translate that as the Buddha nature and so forth, or the image of God, if you come from a Jewish tradition. And of course, Thomas Merton was an incredible writer and poet, and was so in touch with his creativity. So in my book on Thomas Merton, I have a whole chapter on Merton and the Via Creativa. He was also a musician, and he would teach the novices to make baskets. Yeah, to weave baskets. That was part of his spiritual practice for the novices. He knew all about art as meditation. And art as meditation is the way of the prophets. So we talk about mystics and prophets, then the real journey, the real bridge to our prophetic work is the mystical work. The creative work. And then finally, of course, Mary Oliver, I mean, she called herself a praise poet, and she was an amazing poet. She did not have an easy life. She came to praise after struggling terribly with a damaged soul, having been a sexual abuse survivor at the hands of her father. So it was not an easy thing, but her whole life was redeemed through her love of nature and her creativity, her work as a poet. So again, we'll be led in this course by people who are utterly knowledgeable of the Via Creativa.
Thank you so much. It's so great to have you with us today. We have time for a few more questions, but before we take those, I want to give our listeners a few details about training for the modern mystics and prophets. So this is going to be a really transformative 7 weeks with Matthew, as you can probably tell. Well, you'll experience a shift in mind and an opening in their heart. This 7 weeks will take place starting Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific. September the 4th is our start date. And if you have any reason that you're unable to join us live, do not worry, you won't miss our teachings. You receive the audio and video replays, transcripts, and any handouts through our course homepage. Also, I'd like to remind you that we offer a no-risk money-back guarantee on all of our courses, giving you until September 18th to make sure you absolutely love this course. And as an added option, all participants are welcome and invited to connect on a private community Facebook group. That's for the course only, and you can stay connected to one another there. And everyone who registers receives an extensive training for modern mystics and prophets bonus package, and that is a wonderful package. It includes an audio dialogue with Matthew Fox and Andrew Harvey. Hildegard von Bingen and the Divine Feminine is the title of that one. Also, Creativity, Where the Divine and Human Meet. This is a video sermon from Matthew. And A True Journey of Consciousness. That is a an audio dialogue with Matthew and our Enneagram faculty member, Jessica Dibb. And also an audio dialogue with Matthew and Father Beatty Griffiths called Mysticism and Creation Spirituality. And when you register by midnight Pacific, this Thursday, August the 29th, you receive this special bonus called The Dark Night and the Path of Sacred Activism. This is an audio dialogue with Matthew and Andrew Harvey. So we have time for a couple more questions. I want to get over to them because we've gotten many questions coming in. Aura says, do you think it's true that everyone sees Jesus according to their reality? Can he look differently to different people?
Can you look differently, or does Jesus look differently? I didn't understand the question. Does Jesus look differently to different people? Is that the question?
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. I think that's the power of a great being like Jesus was. That it's like a diamond. It will flash a different color, a different way, in light of the particular light that's shining on it, or shadow. And I think that all of us have so many dimensions to our being. But the great beings have, they're more in touch with their multiple dimensions. And someone like Jesus then, and also there's an archetypal force with Jesus, and what we call the cosmic Christ, that there's an unleashing of energy and light that that happened with the historical person of Jesus. And of course, then this experience of the cosmic Christ, it will very often come as light, but different people will experience it in different ways. Like I mentioned this fellow who identifies as Native American in his practice. And then he ended up carving a Native American memo, if you will, a memory of his experience with Christ. So, like any experience of another person, everyone experiences the person differently according to our own view of things. It's the old story of the blind man and the elephant. Everyone experiences things according to their own subjective presence. So certainly, I think Jesus and other great spiritual figures can be like a diamond, interpreted or turned in so many different ways. And then this archetype, if you will, this force that he unleashed, that I call the cosmic Christ, this then is even more diverse. It's omnipresent. It's the light in all things. It's the light in every atom. We now know that every atom in the universe has photons or light waves, but it's also the light in the universe itself. So it's a macrocosm, but also the microcosm. And what it's telling us is that that all beings are holy, all beings are sacred, and they all mirror, therefore, they flash the sacredness of all things. And this applies to ourselves too. We are other Christs, as Thomas Burton says, and as Meister Eckhart says. We are other Buddhas. We are other images of God, as the Jewish traditions would say. So definitely, I think that one way I look on Jesus is that we now know, science tells us, that light is both a wave and a particle, So I see Jesus as a particle, as an historical, about 30 years, etc., got murdered by the empire. But the wave is the Christ. The wave is the cosmic Christ. And so obviously we're all going to have a different take on this cosmic Christ, if you will. Not utterly different, because the effects are meant to be about peace and peacemaking. I like to emphasize, Jesus never said, "Blessed are the peaceful." He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." So it's not enough to be peaceful. We have to be making peace. That's what the Via Transformativa is all about. Because you don't have peace without justice. So I think that it's like, take a flower. Depending on what side of the room you're in, you're going to see it differently. And different people are going to see it differently, smell it differently, and the rest. So there's so much subjectivity embedded in our experiential lives. And this, we don't have to apologize for that. We want to welcome the diversity. Vive la différence, as the French say. Celebrate the differences. And that's what's so exciting, to hear what the Jesus event says to this person, what it says to that person, what it says to this person, and how do we pool our common experience, our common wisdom, and the values that are derived from these experiences. That's where we want to work together around putting the values into practice. And I think it's pretty clear that Jesus is really explicit. For example, be you compassionate, as your Creator in heaven is compassionate, it says in Luke 6. Well, compassion is an ultimate value for Jesus, as it is for the Dalai Lama, who says we can do away with all religion, but we can't do away with compassion, says the Dalai Lama. Compassion is my religion. Well, I think if you go around to all the religions, Muhammad too, the Quran, by far the most common adjective used for Allah in the Quran is Allah, the compassionate one. So I think that really all spiritual traditions are trying to get us to this recess of our powers for compassion. And if humanity is going to survive, and that's a big if, it's a big if humanity is going to survive, it is going to be because we will move to another level of evolution the level that people like Jesus and Isaiah and Muhammad and the Dalai Lama and the Buddha and so forth and Black Elk have been trying to teach us that we are here to be mirrors of divinity, and that means to act out compassion, to be the hands of the compassionate one, as Rabbi Heschel says. So, yeah, I think that addresses the question.
It does. Thank you. We have one more question from David. Assuming democratizing mysticism means bringing it into our busy everyday lives, how do we bring all this down to earth and yet prevent it from losing its sacred underpinnings?
Well, that's a real good question. I'm glad to hear the phrase democratizing mysticism, because I don't think we've used it today, but it's certainly part of my vocabulary. I think in many ways my life's work has been to try to democratize mysticism and to demonstrate to people that we are all mystics. We were all mystics as children, unless we had a particularly destructive upbringing. But even then, I've met people who became very mystical in the presence of an oppressed childhood. But the question is always how to keep this grounded and all. Yeah. Well, one thing is that suffering and struggle and the fight for justice in a world of injustice, that keeps you grounded. There's nothing that keeps you grounded like coming up against dark forces. And there are dark forces. Evil is real. Rabbi Zalman Schachter used to say, there's more good than evil in the world, but not by much. There's more good than evil in the world, but not by much. I think it's very realistic and very grounded, what he's saying there. And of course, history is not always pretty by any stretch of the imagination. So we're in this struggle. And the struggle itself makes so much demands on us that we have to return to the source. We have to return to solitude and stillness. We have to grieve and consciously deal with loss, with suffering, our own and others. And of course, it's one suffering. And we have to continually return to joy and awe and wonder. We began this way in our conversation today, to remember. So there's work to do. There's inner work to do, there's outer work to do. And in our creativity, everyone who gives birth knows that there are labor pains, knows it's a struggle, and there are no guarantees that it's going to come out all right. But as Eckhart says, you work in order to work. You love in order to love. You do justice in order to do justice, he says. You don't do it because of promises of results. And if you see life that way, which is a very Buddhist way to see life, by the way, then you realize that the process itself is, the journey itself is the joy. You learn to have fun on a daily basis and joy on a daily basis, even when there's struggle, there's suffering, there's loss, there's temporary setbacks. That's why bringing the profound teachings of the mystics to our work, wherever we work, to our professions, but also to the work for justice, wherever that is played out in our lives, that guarantees that we will be fully present to the task. And when you're fully task, good things happen. Good things happen.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Well, this has just been a wonderful hour, and I want to thank everyone for sending some great questions in and being with us today. Training for Modern Mystics and Prophets begins Wednesday, September 4th. We'd love to have you with us. Please visit modernmysticsandprophets.com to learn more about the course and, of course, to register. And if you do so by midnight tomorrow, Thursday, August 29th, you'll receive that special bonus, The Dark Night and the Path of Sacred Activism. Matthew, I want to turn it over to you for any final words for our listeners.
Well, I want to thank you, Anne, for your leadership, your emceeing this hour, which went very fast. I want to thank the questioners. Your questions were wonderful, quite sophisticated, I might add, and that's enticing. Makes me look forward even more to the class that we'll have together. So let's just take a moment of silent gratitude. Meister Eckhart says, if the only prayer you say in your whole life is thank you, that would suffice. So let's be grateful for the breath that we can so often take for granted. Feel it in your body. For our eyes, our ears, our minds, our imaginations, our hearts, our hands, our feet. May we bring gratitude to all that we do and learn every day to take for granted less and less. Amen.
Thank you so much, Matthew.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And on behalf of all of us here at the Shift Network, we wish you well, and we look forward to having you on this course or on one in the future. Be well.